Hey everybody, welcome to this wonderful Q&A session we have at the end of this great event today. It's just been a lot of hours of really important information that has come out, and it's just been a whole lot of fun watching the presentations and the engagement that we've had. And so today we have the entire group of speakers that we can fit into the meeting today with all of our team leads, and we're going to go through some conversation and some questions. But to start things off, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator today, Captain Dave Carbaugh. Dave, as many of you might know, he's the originator of the original airplane upset recovery training aid in the late 90s at the air carrier level. And with us, we have Rich Stoll as well, who really started it all from General Aviation way back at about the same time period. So we really have the bookends to the different parts of the industry that we're kind of bringing it all together here to take what we hope to effective upset training to another level of effectiveness. So Dave, over to you for a few thoughts and maybe to the first topic of discussion today.
Thanks, BJ. Great session today. All of the speakers were fantastic, and much information was given to all of our audience. And I think that's going to continue to make our efforts even more robust, having such a great group. The first question that I kind of have for our group here is one that talks about the cost of General Aviation UPRT and how we might be able to reduce that cost and make it more affordable for the operators in General Aviation. And so, Shane, I know we've discussed this in the past, and you have some thoughts that I think are very relevant to this discussion. Shane?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And look, I'd just like to pass on my congratulations to the rest of our team here. Fantastic presentations, and I think it's really there's going to be some really powerful information there for the rest of the industry. Look, for GA instructing, this is going to be a real bottleneck, and it's going to be a really big focus part of our General Aviation team moving forward into 2026 and onwards into 2027 and onwards. And I'll certainly throw to Rich here as well for his input. But look, we do know that across the world now that flying training is becoming an extremely expensive exercise, much more so than when we were learning to fly some decades ago. But the power of UPRT cannot be underestimated, and it cannot be forgotten in general license training. Everyone from the recreational pilot through to those going through onto the airlines or into more advanced operations in their career. For us, what we're looking at is how do we instill the UPRT principles on a first look basis in basic flight training. And this is not something that's going to be very difficult to do if it is done well, and if it is done with the UPRT principles that are discussed within the EPIC S2 standard. If they are discussed and instilled in the flight instructors, in their flight instructor ratings, the trickle-down effects will be incredibly powerful. So people like us at UPRT Australia or BJ at APS and those others who are teaching advanced UPRT concepts, we really don't have to change the mindset of the pilots in a massive way. We don't have to undo bad knowledge. We don't have to undo bad skills. And what we can do is our training then becomes taking it to that next element that cannot be done safely in a general aviation aircraft. And so the system itself becomes a lot more stronger at a foundational level, and that becomes an incredibly powerful tool. So, Rich, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. Thank you, Shane, and great job, everybody, today. I think we also want to look at trying to shift the paradigm away from cost and onto value. I know a lot of us have heard from our own trainees that they've learned more in 3 hours, 5 hours of what we do as UPRT providers than perhaps in the previous 100 hours of flying. So there is a value proposition that we don't do as good a job, I think, articulating that. And one of the reasons for the high student attrition rate in the U.S. is not the cost of training, it's the value they're receiving for that cost. And, as Shane said, if we can start to incorporate concepts earlier as part of primary instruction, but also improve the value that pilots are getting with training, I think cost becomes less of a concern. Obviously, whatever we can do to reduce that number against the value, but also, insurance drives a lot of this. And if we can show UPRT has value and does reduce loss of control, maybe that brings insurance rates down, which then brings costs down. So I think it's a whole circle there. Back to you, Shane.
No, that's great. And Janine, I guess from your point of view, looking at the science and how this actually works from a science and human factors perspective, I guess you would agree with that as well.
We absolutely would. And again, congratulations to a great program today. Everybody was just excellent. And from the science team, I can support what Rich and Shane are saying with the data. And if we go back to the introduction to the science team video, we see a schematic of an expert pilot. And right there on the top, it talks about not just how much experience, quote unquote, flight hours one has, but the types of experience and the anecdotal data that we glean from the UPRT students is documented in how that type of experience contributes to the expertise and the performance of our pilots. And definitely it would end up costing a pilot less money to do all of their training if they had UPRT right at the beginning than it does now. As a designated pilot examiner, just coming out of practical tests, we see it all the time. UPRT is a necessary and probably the primary component to flight training.
Excellent. Well, that was wonderful from the GA standpoint and pricing. That's always going to be critical, right? It's going to be the time and price is one of the barriers, right? For just about everything we try to do. And very often we wonder, is it worth it? Well, I guess the answer is, well, compared to what, right? At the end of the day, when you consider the severity of the outcomes. Why don't we now just move backwards through the teams? Let's go ahead and go to Otter with Flight Department UPRT and then over to Brad. Otter, now you're dealing in the Flight Department UPRT with military, corporate executive, 135, the groups that are doing it largely on their own in the United States, whereas in EASA, they do have mandates that do require it. What are your thoughts on the accessibility and the value of UPRT in the part of the market that you're working with?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. I'll just say right off the bat, the military, as was alluded to in the previous presentations, the military has a loss of control in flight problem as well, but they don't even know it because they don't classify the accidents the same way in the civilian world. And so there's some education that needs to go on. We've been able to educate some of the brass with Air Force and Coast Guard and things like that. And so there's some messaging coming out, but they have a long way to go, I think, to embrace this threat that still persists for them. The good news for them is they've got assets, they've got tools that they could use more effectively, such as their primary military trainer, like the T6. It's a great platform to do comprehensive UPRT in the hands of a skilled instructor. On the government side, like law enforcement, a lot of those pilots in police departments and things, they're just starting, they're usually coming right off the street, as police officers themselves, and then asked, hey, would you like to be a pilot? So they go through quick pilot training, and they're typically getting civilian flight training as well. So they've got a big threat, because now they're going to end up doing things that most general aviation pilots don't do. They're circling low, maneuvering, and all of that. So their threat window is even larger there. So we need to help ensure that they get some of this.
Well, one of the unique things I think about your area, Otter, it's one of the only, only areas of aviation where it's not about funding. It's about getting the best quality program that fits their flight operation. And that's part of the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard, to meet pilots based on what, where, and how they operate. So to design the program to really mitigate their risks that they have in their type of flight operation. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity, kind of the testing ground for that approach to mitigating risk, where best practices can truly be implemented and could be one of the first uptake areas of UPRTA International is in your market, so to speak. So with that, let's go over to Brad and Brian. Brad, your thoughts from South Africa and any of the areas that we've talked about today, do you want to comment on, or do you want to pivot over to the regulatory UPRT topic?
Thanks, BJ, and welcome to everybody watching, and congratulations to all the presenters today. I certainly learned a lot as well about SMS, etc. But from our standpoint, what we've just discussed already, we actually got our insurance company to fund the UPRT costs for training of instructors, and we sent 12 instructors to APS to carry out their UPRT training, and the insurance company saw that as a big spin-off, a very valuable excellent way to spend their money in terms of value for money and what they got in return. And I think that's something that maybe the industry should look at as well. Insurance companies should provide some sort of incentive for pilots and for operators to carry out proper UPRT. I'm not too sure if Brian agrees, but it's definitely something that we need to look at in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. I probably would not be the one to comment on insurance rates. That would be beyond my purview of expertise. But I will say, as we looked at the regulatory side of this for the air carriers, the scale at which we're operating is very, very large. And so really the key piece that stuck out to me was the standardization of the training. And to kind of go back with one of the original comments that was made at the beginning here, particular to the instructors, I guess, is really where that standardization starts, is that you have a highly standardized group of instructors, and then that trickles down to the pilot group. At Delta, we have close to 18,000 pilots now. We have a group of about 800 instructors, and then we have currently about 12 subject matter experts. And so really, we take the tip of the spear as best we can, train them as highly as we can, and then they disseminate that to the other instructors. They disseminate that out to the other pilots. And to touch on the data note, I think it was Gene that mentioned that we've seen a tremendous improvement in the flight safety data at Delta. And if you've heard me speak in the past, you've heard the details on that. But those would be my comments as it relates to what we're talking about right now.
So we have a great comment here, and I want to interject it here from Captain Philip Adrian in this topic of regulatory UPRT. He correctly identifies the KODOC 111, which is the airplane and upset, or the manual on airplane upset prevention and recovery training. It does recommend UPRT for GA operations. And I think one thing to note there, then I'll hand it over to the group, is one of the reasons why UPRTA exists, in fact, got reenacted in version 2, is the fact that while the regulatory organizations, for example, the oversight organization of ICAO, then landing in the national aviation authorities and creating regulatory guidance, is they did a fantastic job of identifying what to do. The problem, of course, is doing it in a way where it's going to truly mitigate risk. So one of the reasons why we have UPRTA here is to help with the execution, is how do we do that to optimize the implementation? Because in many implementations, they're seeing little to no difference in the risk mitigation of the solutions. Very often, despite having great regulatory guidance, just largely doing what they were doing before under a different name. And so why don't I go from that? In fact, why don't we go over to somebody who hasn't commented yet here. In fact, before we do that, Dave, why don't we go over to you, because you were the originator of the airplane upset recovery training aid in all of its versions, from the original revision 1, revision 2, and then there was a revision 3 that came out. What are your thoughts on industry guidance? And then also on how are we going to follow the model that you introduced in the very first session today of how now making differences across aviation in the effectiveness of the training?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, BJ. The fact is, the regulations are still varied around the world, and the implementation of those regulations is even more varied. And part of UPRTA's job is to develop a gold standard that each of these countries and organizations can use in order to get the best benefit for their training. And the original guidance that came out was aimed at the commercial operators. And part of UPRTA's job is to expand that throughout the whole spectrum of from the beginning pilot to the commercial operator, and expand that guidance because the training needs to be appropriate to that person's experience and the type of operations they're going to be doing. And so for Shane and the group doing GA, that's really important to get the appropriate amount of training. And so UPRTA's got that goal to go ahead and provide that information, provide the instructional material for instructors so that they can meet that goal. So it's a little bit different than back in the 90s where we were just focused on commercial there, BJ.
And so I think, Rich, you might have something to offer here because you had a similar experience with Advisory Circular 6167, which was on stall and spin awareness training, and you had a big part of drafting that. And so you can't say that effort hasn't been made to try to mitigate these risks. But again, it's a lot about how it's implemented. Did you want to comment on that before we move off of Philip's great point here?
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, when 6167 came out, unfortunately, I did not have any hand in drafting it. It happened to organically come out from FAA as a pretty darn good document. The problem is on the implementation level. Even 20 years since it first came out, 1991, a lot of students, a high percentage, have never heard of it, never seen it. So the information's not getting to the instructor level. The competency at the instructor level, as we've talked about, is not where it needs to be with stall spin awareness, and as a result, that doesn't trickle down to the student pilot population as well. And so we can put out all the great guidance we want, but how do we get it into the minds, into the hands, into the training at the instructor level, and then permeating into the student level? Back to you.
Excellent. Great. Sorry for that misstep there, Rich. It just sounds like you talking whenever I read that document. So it's I attribute it to you for sure. Okay, this is a great one because the last two teams we have, not that we're stopping after our two teams, is we have SMS UPRT and UPRT Science. And I thought this comment by Dave Cook was a really pointed one and penetrating comment. Is who's training judgment, self-awareness, and accountability. And a lot of that has implications to human factors and also from the accountability, responsibility from the safety organization itself and how it's implemented either as individual pilots or at the operation. And so why don't we go to you, Janine, to comment first, maybe particularly on the judgment and self-awareness. And of course, you have plenty of opinion on accountability, and then go to Jeff for his thoughts on how your teams can help out with this one, because this is right a bullseye, right? This is a really good point.
It is, and thanks for that question, David. It's a great one. And a little bit of background: in the early 1980s, we had a group of pilots and researchers that were actually called the judgment junkies, quote unquote. And the whole point of what we were doing was, it had always been said, you can't teach judgment. You can't teach judgment. So as researchers and pilots, we said, well, let's see if we can or cannot. And based at The Ohio State University under Dr. Richard Jensen, who is known as the father of pilot judgment training, by the way, we decided we were going to really look and see if we can teach human beings to make better decisions. And over the years, and I'm talking many, many decades, we have been able to show through research studies that we can indeed teach judgment. We can teach self-awareness, if you will. Our big word for that is metacognition. are we thinking about what we're thinking about? Can we evaluate our own performance? And can we, take responsibility for the outcome of our decisions and our performance? So that's where the science team comes in and says, yes, we can do it. And we're here to show, again, we're back to the implementation. We need to better show the training communities how this can be done. And the UPRT training program that UPRTA is presenting is going to show us how to do that. So we are, to answer your question, who's doing this? We are, and we're going to share these tools and the how-to with the rest of the aviation community worldwide. Thanks again for the question, David.
All right, Jeff, over to you for thoughts, sir.
Well, I agree completely with what Janine just said, and I think Rich really hit the nail on the head on his presentation. I mean, one of our biggest problems are the flight instructors, and we've got to hold them accountable. I do believe we can teach judgment and aviation decision making, and I guess from the SMS standpoint, let's put it this way: can you imagine starting out a private student and not teaching crosswind landings? If the wind's across, we just don't go flying that day. It'll be okay. When he does his check ride, he's going to go to Janine, and they're going to go up and go flying, but no crosswind. He'll wait on a calm day to do the flight. And then this poor guy gets his private license, and he goes out, and the first time he goes out flying, he's got a 15, 20-degree crosswind, and he's not prepared for it. So essentially, we've built a system that's built to fail because that's what we do with loss control in flight. We know it's there, but we hope it doesn't happen, and so we just continue down this path. And so from the SMS standpoint, I mean, that's what SMS is all about, is learning to recognize areas that are going to bite us. Look at risk mitigation, and then developing techniques and standards to identify these risks that we have and how to take care of them. And so I think that's where UPRTA is going to be able to truly make a difference, is that we're going to provide ways to teach people, to help them make better judgments, to help them be more self-aware, and really to hold them accountable, to make sure they're keeping their skills up to date. And so again, I think that what we're doing now with UPRTA is going to be one of these things, going to be a fundamental shift in the way that we're teaching pilots, not only teaching entry-level pilots, but giving pilots that are already in this career ways to improve themselves and to continue to better themselves.
And Jeff, that's a real good point, because we always have to look at the fact that doing training, UPRT type training, not only is that improving our ability to prevent and recover from upset incidents, it also improves our basic skill level at all levels of aviation. We got to use that as part of increasing the value of having this kind of training.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, we're getting lots of questions coming in now, everybody. But what I wanted to do here real quick before I forget is I do want to make sure we bring attention to our sponsors for the event today. And so without them, it can't happen. So big thanks to Strike Flyers, Aviation Safety Compliance, UPRT Australia, APS, and CAE. Just wonderful to have their support for this. Okay, wonderful. I just wanted to share with everybody that the YouTube feed into the UPRTA channel was shut down by YouTube and got stuck for some reason, so it's not working. So we're going to repost that in YouTube. We're just going to put a recording of this session out there so I can see the folks in there making comments about not being able to see the feed and so forth. So we've put a link over there to bring people here. So we'll see if everybody can get here. If not, then you can always send questions to us by going to UPRTA.org and going to info@uprta.org and send those questions in. So one thing I do want to bring up here from Jeremy, I think is really important. And of course, Janine's going to love the first few words in this sentence, which includes startle, surprise, which gets everybody excited, right? Is pilots not understanding or deal with startle, surprise continues to cause loss control and flight accidents. Are psychologists and human factors experts outside of aviation going to be consulted to teach us about what we don't know? So I guess that's an interesting question. So does that mean that psychologists inside aviation don't know what they're talking about? I'm going to leave that one to you, Janine. Why don't you give some thoughts on that?
Jeremy, what an interesting question. The pilots not understanding or dealing with startle and surprise is not necessarily going to be affected by the psychologists and human factors experts outside of aviation. We could consult them and say outside of aviation in military, law enforcement, and some other domains. And maybe there is something we don't know, but we certainly do know that if we even look at the prevention part of UPRT, that prevention includes making sure that the pilots understand how startle and surprise affect them. And we talk about it, and we actually show them in the aircraft how their performance changes when they're startled or surprised with our surprise events. And it will be that awareness of the prevention, and making sure that our pilots can use their adaptive expertise, if you will, to be able to continue to function at a high level after they've encountered an unexpected event that startles or surprises them. So I think coincidentally, we have a lot of human factors experts and researchers and psychologists within the aviation domain that have done a lot of research and studies on this. So I will ask Jeremy, if you know psychologists or human factors experts outside of aviation that could contribute to us, and perhaps we're missing something. We are always open to input, because we're in this all together, and that's why those of you in the audience today are very, very important to this effort. So thanks for the question.
Excellent. So if you would, I'm going to just actually point this over to Brian, which you probably didn't expect, Brian, because I think one of the great findings in your 5-year, 5 million flight study on improved awareness and understanding, recognition, and avoidance, you saw that the precursor conditions of an airplane upset were reduced by 50% by a very comprehensive implementation of effective UPRT. So one way to mitigate startle and surprise is never be startled and surprised in the first place, is to increase the awareness on the flight deck. Now, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you want to talk to that comment about the value of maybe awareness and prevention when it comes to all the hard work and wonderful outcomes Delta's had?
Sure, absolutely. In fact, there's a lot of overlap here in what we're talking about, whether it's GA or corporate, airline, military, what have you. And I've been kind of sort of brainstorming, even just listening to some of the other experts on here talk. But yes, I think to sort of tie the pieces together here, on one hand, the FARs are very sparse in the guidance that they give us on the 7 maneuvers. And so when we started into UPRT and when we started into extended envelope training, it was sort of the world is our oyster. Where do we go here? So we looked at the advisory circulars, we looked at the FARs, we talked to the people who wrote them, said, what do you want us to do? And so we started to develop the program. And it was sort of, let's throw this on the wall and see what sticks, to be blunt about it. But then as we began to gather the flight data and to say, okay, where do we really have problems on the line? Where do we see approach to stall or full stall events? Where do we see loss of control events? It really began to color the picture for us. And so what we've done is we've taken all of that flight data, which you mentioned, 50% reduction in upset rate over 5 million flights. We're now up to almost 7 million flights worth of data. And that, those numbers have changed over the years, but we're still down about 50% to the good from where we started when we started tracking this data back in 2018. So where am I going with that? Where I'm going with that is we look at the events that happen online across 7 million flights and say, okay, what are the common denominators? Where did a Boeing airplane have an issue? Where did an Airbus issue take place? And then we take those scenarios and we recreate training scenarios for our pilots. So we can say, hey, look, this was a fully qualified crew in a fully capable operational aircraft that got here. How did they get here? Well, let's show you how they got there. So you will begin to recognize some of the precursor events to lead to those events. And so awareness is huge. I could, give you a number of examples here if that would be valuable. But the other thing I want to comment on, and I was kind of thinking about this in terms of the scale that we operate in the 121 world versus some of the smaller flight schools and some of the smaller corporate flight departments that may not have the ability to pull a flight data recorder off an aircraft on a regular basis and look at those flights. But that would really, what I would encourage those departments to do is to encourage self-reporting among their pilots. And you can do the same thing in your flight department. You can do the same thing in your flight school that we do at Delta. And we have an ASAP program. So we have the FOQA data that pulls the flight data off the airplane. But then we also have an ASAP programs where pilots can self-report and say, hey, here's how I got into this scenario. A lot of the low speed scenarios we see are at high altitude, high temperature, thrust limited region of flight, but we also see them at low altitude when things like speed brakes are extended and we're configuring for final approach. And so if I know that in certain regions of flight, I am much more susceptible to get into a low speed event, I can have all hands on deck. And so, yeah, I would just encourage the self-reporting and then to share that information within your department with the other pilots, the other instructors, and say, hey, here's how it happened to me. Let's see what we can do to train to mitigate that risk for our other pilots and raise the awareness. So hopefully that was helpful.
That's great. And I don't know, Otter, if you want to comment. I know that for the program, for example, a lot of UPRT providers implement addressing startled surprise is kind of part and parcel with the process, but to scenario-based unexpected introduction to startled surprise can harm or improve confidence depending on the timing of when it's implemented into the training. So did you want to maybe chat about that before we move on to the next question, or anybody else as well? You're on mute, Otter, so if you want to unmute yourself there.
There we go. Okay. No, I would agree with that. In fact, we had discussions on this in the Stall Sig Pusher group because there were some organizations that were trying to startle their initial new hire pilots in the simulator by putting them in some pretty chaotic upsets, and their line of reasoning was, hey, if we put the fear of God in them, maybe they'll listen to us after this kind of thing. And it really did not do well. And I know Janine can speak to this. We cannot instill fear in pilots doing this training. We've got to do a stepping stone approach to this to build their confidence with the competence there. So there needs to be a method to this, and we don't have the luxury. We don't have the luxury of showing off, certainly in an airplane or even a simulator. And the simulator is very tough to create real startle and surprise anyway. And I know there are, with the best of intentions, there's some instructors out there that try to do it. But unfortunately, it's not an appropriate environment to address that. That's where the real airplane needs to come into play.
And unfortunately, to your point, Otter, when they try to use simulation to create real startle and surprise, usually it's at the expense of negative training, because the aero model of flight off is just so severe and so inappropriate that the lessons they take away are the wrong ones very often. Anybody else want to comment on this? We do have other questions, but I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to talk about startle and surprise, because it is central to really what's missing in pilots being able to effectively deal with a developing or developed airplane upset, as opposed to preventing it in the first place.
Yep.
Yeah.
BJ,
Part of the problem with commercial operations and using simulators to try and do startle and surprise is, like Otter talked about, it's unrealistic and a breeding ground for negative training. But the one thing that we can do, and what has happened over the years, is we've kind of got into a can scenario. For example, runaway trim seems to always be done on climb out. And so the pilots are ready for it and they're aware of it. And it ends up being a very minor event because of that. Where if you do it in a place where they're not expecting it, then you do get an element of startle and surprise. So I think mixing up the training for instructors to try and achieve that in the simulator does have some potential of having appropriate. Okay, Rich, you were mentioning.
Yeah, the startle and surprise. That topic reminds me of the Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. And the reality is it's a mindset thing, right? The reality is pilots, unless you've had training, you don't know how you're going to react. And, good UPRT training at the right time and the right equipment, right mindset, we can figuratively punch you in the face and have you deal with that. Okay, what happens now? What are you going to do next? And so that's just from a less of a human factor standpoint and more of a practical, reason why UPRT is important, to put people in an environment where they don't have to imagine how they'll react. They can see how they'll react, and then we can train the appropriate reactions from there. Back to you.
Excellent. Great. Well, this is more of a statement than anything else. Sorry, Jeff, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I'm really passionate about this. This is where instructors make all the difference in the world. I love Rich's quote, Mike Tyson quote. But if we've got good instructors, they teach us how to block that punch. And that's the key thing, is that with UPRT, we're teaching them how to block that punch. We're also, if we've got good instructors, primary, advanced, going to CAE or flight safety or SimCom, if you've got a motivated instructor that's taking the time to put his syllabus together to where you can't predict what you're going to do on day 2, hour 3, so forth and so on, then you build up this toolkit that's going to allow you to handle most things that are thrown at you. And so if there's any one thing that's going to make a big difference, is A, providing a standard that people are going to teach by, and then B, having the instructors that are going to follow that standard and be professional about the way they instruct.
Let me bring this comment in, guys, just because I think it's a nice statement that gets made here, because it does sort of put an end cap on this from a realistic perspective. And so Nick says, this is why the topic and discussion is so important. A pilot who has not experienced real upset recovery training cannot make the correct decisions in recovery techniques. From my experience, this is a real problem with the new generation of pilots. I came back from rest on a long-haul flight and found the aircraft at its maximum altitude with both pilots reading books and newspapers. The lack of understanding of how vulnerable the aircraft is left me deeply troubled. And I think that, that's a testament, just aerodynamic knowledge, in addition to all the human factor and skill concepts we're talking about here today. Let me pull this down while we comment, because it's blocking off a few of the people here. Anybody want to share comments on that? I think this is a nice segue into the value of effective academic training, perhaps, but it doesn't have to be what we talk about.
Yeah,
Look,
BJ, comment.
The only thing I'd say on that is that UPRT is not URT. It's prevention and recovery training. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of recovery. Mm-hmm. And if we can instill these early in the primacy, these fundamental knowledge gaps that are there, we can block those. As Jeff said, we're blocking the punch. We're not allowing ourselves to be punched. We're actually executing an effective prevention strategy as opposed to an effective recovery strategy. And that's the thing that Rich and I will be working on in the GA space, is that in GA at the moment, a lot of the training focuses on the recovery. We're allowing the pilots to get themselves into the scenario, and then we're training the recovery. We're not training the prevention effectively enough to not let them get there. And that's a really key point.
Brian?
Yeah, BJ, I was going to comment, we try to have a multi-pronged approach to this on the 121 side. So we have what I would consider a very robust academic training profile for UPRT. And then because we can't send 18,000 pilots to on-aircraft training, we demonstrate a lot of this in the simulator. But then we, I think, have been pretty effective at delivering startle and surprise in the simulator. And you can really see it in the physiological reactions of the pilots, the human factors that they exhibit during the post-stall recoveries or during the upsets. But to the point that I think maybe it was Rich made earlier, it really does require a good instructor and someone who's well prepared. And you have to be strategic about it. I'll give you one example. When we first rolled out UPRT back in 2018, the very first recurrent cycle, we gave these pilots what amounted to an inverted nose low upset, and almost no one recovered the airplane. And it was terrible training because they were certainly startled, they were certainly surprised, but the outcome was not good because we hadn't given them the tools to understand what it was that was happening to the airplane, how it could get there, and what's more is how to get out of it if you do get there. And so now we can take a pilot and we could put them into a similar upset, and the vast majority of them would be able to successfully recover from that. But it does take a strategic academic piece, demonstration, as Shane said, the law of primacy, to understand how we got there, so therefore how I can get out. But then you can recreate a lot of that in the simulator with a good instructor and with a fully qualified full motion simulator.
Well, good news, bad news on that, Brian, is just about every airline we work with wants to start with the overbank, nose low, high speed airplane upset because they figure they're going to teach everything all at once, right? But whenever we see that, we're like, no. Okay, building block, we can't go there because it's going to have the opposite outcome. Or you probably remember going through that process with the airlines. The intent is good because the subject matter experts are coming back wanting to show their wares. But unfortunately, when you're introducing it to, hundreds, if not thousands of pilots, you really need to be building block to arrive there several recurrents down the road. So Audrey, do you want to comment on that before we move on?
No, that's true. It's very true. I think, again, a lot of people, and including instructor pilots, feel that UPRT is this little tiny sliver of training, and we can do it real quickly, and we can put them in these and this, and boom, they got the big picture. That's not really the case. It's a multi-day event. And there's a significant amount of knowledge sets that have to be ingrained before they can even impart or implement the skill. So it's not unusual, like you said, for training departments to be that eager.
Right. So if you don't mind, I'd like to go to Brad because, Brad, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. We got to play that video you made for the 2023 Global UPRT Summit on the event that the A340 had, very similar to Air France in some ways, but that the crew had the ability to overcome startle to take effective action. Could you maybe comment that as a result of the training, maybe what your perspective is on that? Because you were central to the training and the investigation in that.
Sure, BJ. Well, I remember actually discussing it with you before that event occurred. We had by then trained about 500 pilots using a strategy, which is a building block approach that took place over a 4-hour simulator session, and wondering whether we'd ever see this actioned in real life. I must say, there is in my opinion, there's a difference between startle and surprise. We taught our pilot, we gave use. BJ, can you hear me? I'm just getting a little bit of feedback there.
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Brad. So you're going to have to talk figuratively because we can't see you. So,
I think you're on mute, BJ.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Let me see. No, I'm not. I think maybe you're not hearing us, Brad. So why don't we come back to you when your feed's a little bit better? I'm gonna pull Brad out till he fixes his connection. Anyway, that particular event was pretty significant, and what we're going to do is post that video in the UPRTA website that Brad did a fantastic video, and if Brian's willing, his presentation he did a few years ago on the incredible research they did. I think we'd like to try to leverage that, but of course we'll ask permission before we do any of that. Let's get over to a practical topic now. And Jeff, this is something we talked about before we started the session. Here's the question here from a LinkedIn user from Amanda's safety risk profile development session. Where can we get the safety risk profile table entries for general aviation operations? So that's a great practical question where we're starting to see some actual deliverables that users can implement.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to make those slides available, and we'll get them on the UPRTA site so that people can go back and look at that, because that gives them a really good starting point to address safety risk profiles.
Excellent, excellent. And the concept of safety risk profiles is just so important. That's one of the challenges we see when we're looking at a safety risk matrix, is when you see the standard ICAO colors of red, orange, green, and so on, mm-hmm. is that's just a model. The operator itself designs that matrix based on their risk tolerance. So it's a really interesting process. SMS is such an important dynamic part of risk mitigation, especially when it comes to upset training. Anything else on that, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people may not think about, but SMS used properly can really be advantageous for implementing UPRT, because the whole thing about SMS is learning to look at your risk and the hazards and how you're going to mitigate the risks, and then come up with ways to take care of all this. And so, looking at your safety risk management piece that Jim Hosey talked about, we're going to have tools for that are going to come out next year. And then obviously with the safety risk profiles, each individual operator really can sit down and look at what their safety risk profiles are. A Part 61 flight school can definitely build an SMS, and they can identify their safety risk profile based on the kind of instructing they're doing. The same thing goes for a Part 135 operator. Somebody that's going from Atlanta to Orlando on a regular basis and doesn't do a lot of circling approaches. The circling approach may not be one of their may not be a big risk to them because they don't do them that much. You can also flip that the other way. Because they don't do them, it's a risk. So anyway, developing safety risk profiles can make a big difference in an operation.
So Jeff, I'll just note that the same user, we don't have his name, just mentioned that Amanda's slides did not include General Aviation. So if there's a way of integrating that, I think that
I'll get with Amanda, because that's I'll have her. Well, she actually talked about flight schools and part of it, okay. And but I'll have her make sure we include General Aviation into that.
Awesome, great. Well, I'm sure more are going to come in here. I have only one more question in queue, and we're getting to the top or the last quarter of the event today. So this is from Philip. Again, those who don't know Captain Philip Adrian, of course, Dave knows him really well. He's been involved in much of the work on upset prevention recovery training with the LOC-I and work with ICAO and EASA. His mention here, I think, is very appropriate. Can UPRTA coordinate publication of events and mitigations like the OEMs do for EBT support? And the intent has always been to share knowledge. And I think that's exactly what we're doing with UPRTA. We're here to be additive to the industry, to support the industry initiatives, not contradict them. It's to take what's out there already and to make it more effective. It's not about changing anything. And I think that's really, really key. So Philip, yes, we're on the team. We're here to help. And we'd love to have you join UPRTA. So here's a recruiting call for you as well. So if you're interested, maybe Dave will be on the phone here calling you later today. All right. Anything else? Dave, any thoughts on that? Because I think Philip is certainly looking at the 50,000-foot view of this and how we integrate globally.
Yeah, Philip's always been a big player in UPRT, and it's a very appropriate comment. We have a lot of different government organizations and operators and organizations, and we have to provide them with appropriate information so that they can be successful. And so I think Philip's point is right on. It's safety information done appropriately, and it's how to do it. The basics are there, the details and the appropriate information is something that UPRTA is all about.
Anybody else want to comment that on integrating with industry before we go to our now last question? I thought that was the last one, but we have another one. Philip says, count me in, by the way, Dave. I see his comment here.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else want to talk about industry integration? Because I think that's really central to the role of UPRTA, is that it's a very collaborative initiative. And from an organizational standpoint, the senior leadership team is focused on just strategic positioning, but the operational leadership of UPRTA is at the team lead level, the group that's right here on the call. So it's very much an operational association that we have. Anybody else?
So BJ, the other thing I'll say is
go ahead.
From a general aviation perspective, this is we are the poor cousin in some ways. We don't have the finances, but the thing is that we do have the technology, we do have the resources available to be able to implement these risk mitigation strategies and these safety management systems into general aviation. And part of this will be part of the UPRTA work that we will be doing, is providing meaningful implementation tools across the GA spectrum. So stay tuned on that.
Great. Janine?
I would say this is the only organization I have ever seen that goes across the lines from, as Dave said in his opening statement from the student in the Cessna 150 to the A380 captain. That was the greatest comment, Dave. And it is all of us. And we're here, and instead of segmenting, well, as we hear often, well, Part 61 pilot doesn't need to know that. That's for the airlines. The airlines don't care about what we teach the Part 141 students. And now we're one organization that's going to pull this thread all the way across the spectrum of each and every pilot's journey and be consistent as we do it. So we can set that example in UPRT, but in addition, we have to remember that UPRT is going to bring awareness and prevention strategies that encompass every bit of flying. And the gentleman that said something about coming back up on the flight deck and they were at max altitude and reading their newspapers. Well, if we take a look and the awareness that those, as he put it, this new generation of pilots don't have, I would be willing to bet if they came through a UPRT program, they would have much better awareness of all the hazards or all the threats and all the hazards that are out there, and not just because they might lose control of their aircraft, but something else might happen. So I think this organization is bringing together all aspects of a pilot's journey, and I hope thousands of pilots come along.
Well, I was wondering what you're going to say when we're the only organization to cross lines. That was interesting to see the direction you took on that, but I 100% agree. Excellent. So on that topic, I'll bring this one in about United Aviate. And I know Otter's not here. I'm 100% sure he had to go flying of how busy we are this week. The upcoming results, United Aviate Academy, which were really powerful outcomes. That was the 400% increase in skills. It's the problem with releasing the full details. It's United Airlines, United Aviate Academy, and APS. And certainly APS is willing to release it, but it's a little bit of a glacial process to get the details fully released. So, Janine was a researcher on that. So we're going to do everything we can to get it released. That said, there's a great article by Aviation International News that talks about really the tangible key takeaways, that training and the implementation, the structure of the program. So I can reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll send you that link if I can't find it while we're in the call here today. So here's a question that I'll put out to be Brad, I guess, and maybe Janine. It's a really good question because Janine and I went through this on the MBAA Safety Committee about creating a list of flight schools that meet industry requirements. In fact, qualification, this certification accreditation process is a deliverable of UPRTA down the road. It's a direction that we're working on. We're not there yet. I can tell you that there's a right way and wrong way to go through that process. Because it really needs to be a list of operators that are truly delivering effective upset prevention and recovery training. The structure of that will be forthcoming. But let me just pause there and why don't we go to Janine first, maybe in your thoughts of identifying flight schools, and then go to Shane because Australia is going through this process right now. I think there's going to be some interesting comments you can make, Shane, and that'll probably bring us to the end of the event. So Janine for initial thoughts, then over to Shane for final thoughts.
As BJ said, we started this with NBAA years and years ago, but from the science team perspective, what we want to make sure is when we, conduct an evaluation of a flight training provider for UPRT, what's important and how do we ask the questions and what data, what information is pertinent and relevant to whether they are providing, as this question says, true UPRT. And, this also brings up just the idea that aerobatics instruction is not necessarily true UPRT. So from the science team perspective, we're going to continue or pick up with that evaluation and find good criteria, valid and reliable criteria for evaluating training providers for UPRT.
Yeah, one of the challenges with aerobatics, of course, is very often a type-specific precision plan maneuver, and effective upset training is a non-type specific, non-precision, unplanned condition. So while there's similar concepts that can transfer, how you teach it is very, very different. certainly. So over to you, Shane, and then in fact, maybe then to Rich, if we have a minute left as well. I don't want to leave out anybody here that would have perspective on this, but I am sensitive to the hour coming up. So Shane, over to you and what's going on in Australia.
Sure. Look, I'll just try and keep this brief, and then I'll throw to Rich. But something that we are looking at here in Australia is using the EPIC S2 standard as a model. This will be implemented by an independent association, the Australian Flight Training Industry Association. So they're independent of the regulator. However, they work very closely with the regulator. They're a standalone. They're not associated with any one in particular flight school. But what they're going to be looking at is how the UPRT that is advertised is a true UPRT, and the way that they're going to do that is it multi-day? Is it multifaceted? Is it transferable? Are they referencing the documentation that's already out there? They don't have to go reinventing the wheel. Are they referencing ICAO, IATA, FAA, EASA, CASA here in Australia, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority? And what type of instructors are they using? So it's going to start at a very foundational level, very fundamental level, and then it's going to work up, and there will be different gradings within that certification. But the thing is that those who may only meet maybe a bronze standard, they will be given guidance and mentoring to try and bring them up the standard, because obviously the critical thing here is that we've got to put independent businesses aside. This is a bigger picture. This is about the industry and about making sure that all the pilots have the skills, and as many pilots get access to this training. And and again, how is that trickled down back into the law of primacy of foundational flight training, so that they understand the concepts of prevention before they even hit anything like a recovery. So Rich, have you got anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, I echo everything you said there, Shane. On the GA side, it's still very much, buyer beware. Do your research. If you are seeking out UPRT, look at reputations, look at how long have they been in business, testimonials. You can also look at the Upset Prevention and Training Recovery Network, UPRTN.org. They have started at very early stages, but starting an accreditation process that will certainly tie in with UPRTA and the S2 standard and everything else that's going on. So yeah, we are working together, and just if you're looking for UPRT right now on the GA side, do your homework, ask questions, and go from there.
Excellent. I think one of the roles of UPRTA, if not the role of UPRTA, of course, is driving excellence in upset training to save lives globally, which means that we need to be a resource for anybody wanting to do it right. UPRTA should have resources for you to be able to reference and ultimately guide you to that pinnacle level that Shane was referring to be the optimum provider you can be in delivering effective upset training at any level or any combination of implementation. Ideally, we want a fully integrated approach, but at the end of the day, that's just not reasonable or practical for a lot of operators. So with that, I would like to thank everybody here in the call today, our team leads. I know we have some audio problems dropping on and off, but I thought it was a very productive session. Thank you, everybody in the call here today, but especially thank you to everybody out there that joined us today, now live, but also in the future as this replay gets produced, and I'll get it out on the YouTube. We'll have to push a recording out there, unfortunately, but we can't control what YouTube does or does not do. So thank you, everybody, for that. And with that, we are signing off. Thanks, everybody.